Good afternoon. We have 5 presentations in this last session of the day. And we have a relatively short period of time for the 5 sessions, just 90 minutes by the program. So I thought I should try to restrict each of the speakers to, I thought, 13 minutes. And if I'm right with my arithmetic, 5 times 13 is 65, which means we should have technically 25 minutes for discussion. I think it would be a great shame if we didn't have time for some discussion of the papers. And I think we should just take the order that appears in the program. The papers, I think, come together in many ways very nicely, in that, as I see it, all of them in some way are about landed power and power relations and their implications. Yeah, so let's just start with Deepa, please. I'm so sorry, I meant to ask everybody about where they come from. Deepa, you have just, you're a postdoctoral fellow at Oxford.
Yes, I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Oxford. I just finished my PhD. Can you hear me? I finished my PhD earlier this year. I'm really happy. Thank you to FAS for allowing me this opportunity to present here, especially because it's among friends from my life in Bangalore. So I'm quite excited and nervous to present. This is the title of my thesis. I haven't changed it for the presentation, but I hope it more or less summarizes. Sorry. I go straight into my research question. I ask if state interventions through social programs can contribute to broader and incremental processes of transformation of the social relations of production. These are the indirect effects of social programs that are run by a capitalist state within the context of capitalist relations of production. As we know, such effects are not the intended outcomes of social programs, which are explicitly focused on welfare. Here I probe the potential for indirect effects of social programs and its limitations. I will now list out the conceptual approaches I take. The study takes a comparative political economy approach to studying the implementation of the social program. The social program is studied here as an intervention in local political economy. This is an approach taken in recent studies that take a class relational approach. Jonathan Pattenden in Karnataka, Indrajit Roy in Bihar, and Bengal in the study of NREGS. Such approaches were taken in the study of social programs by several scholars, though, notably Herring and Edwards in the study of employment guarantee schemes in Maharashtra in the 1980s, and the study of food policy, for example, Yosmuij in South India and Jonathan Fox in Mexico. The broader theoretical framework of the framing of the research question involves class and social policy, drawing on Esping Anderson and earlier theorists who, in the context of social democratic states, study the role of such social programs as a social wage. The social wage may A, lessen the dependence of workers on capital. B, it may decommodify labor or contribute to it. Or C, it may establish critical resources for wage earners that may, among other things, help them to collectivize. Thus, the social program is understood to be structured by the social relations of production, even as its implementation may contribute to changing these relations, or rather, I ask if they do. To embed the study of the social program in the social relations of production, I use an analytically disaggregated approach by studying the relations in the social relations of production as the relations in production, largely the economic sphere, that is the terms and conditions of work, basically employment relations, and what I call relations around production. This is the political sphere in political and economic institutional arenas. These are relations that shape the distribution of public resources, in this case, the social program. I'd like to note here, I don't imply a separation between the two. Instead, my work is seeking to demonstrate how the two are related and interconnected. The framework for the analysis here is Marxist political economy, which views transformation as a process mediated by processes of class struggle. My research studied both struggles from above and below as competing and dialectically linked sets of class interests in the relations in and around production, but given the limitation of time, I will largely focus on struggles from below. The empirical material presented here draws on my fieldwork in 4 villages in Karnataka in 2018 and 2019. I did a survey of a quick survey of 85 to 90% of villages, of households in each village, asking them about socioeconomic conditions, labor practices and cultivation, access to social programs, and organizational involvement. Then I conducted semi-structured interviews of village residents. Informed by the survey, I sought to cover all class and caste groups in the village, NREGS workers, both formal and informal actors in the local, state, and laboring class organizations or unions that were present in all chosen villages. These were the village-level units of the All India Kisan Sabha and the All India Agricultural Workers Union. These are my field sites, Karnataka, Koppal, and Mandya within Karnataka, and the villages within it. The next 2 slides will summarize how my research villages were different from each other. I will not go into the logics of site selection here, but I will quickly take you through the key differences that I thought mattered. These were how I characterized the local political economy of my field sites. As you can see, there are 2 sets of villages. Villages with a polarized socioeconomic structure and peasant-dominated villages. The main aspects here are the relative bipolarity in economic structure. The polarized villages have a high degree of landlessness, 2 to 3 times more than the other set of villages, as the data shows. In these villages, census data shows 2/3 of the population are listed as engaged in agricultural labor as the main occupation. These polarized villages also had a high share of scheduled castes in the population, but I would like to note the high caste heterogeneity of labor or manual workers. By contrast, in the peasant-dominated villages, 76% households cultivate small or marginal lands, largely falling under 2 hectares. The second characteristic is the proximity of the villages to towns. The set of villages closer to towns showed a higher integration with the urban and regional economy, both in terms of labor reproduction and capital accumulation. As you can see in the maps, one is flanked by a national and state highway, one of the villages, and the other has the yellow line, and the other has a state highway cutting right through it. This shapes an interrelated set of variables, that is the patterns of reproduction and accumulation in the villages. As seen in the table, reproduction and accumulation in the remote villages is agriculture-centric. Labor migration is seasonal and circular, meaning a few months a year. The integrated village has a commuting labor population. In one village, it is mainly for construction jobs. In towns and in the other, it is small garment factories, highway hotels, and largely in the services sector. In these villages, 50 to 56% households reported main incomes from these jobs. Now coming to the social program, I will not introduce NREGS here because this audience is familiar with that. I would like to just say that there is a large literature on NREGS, most of which looks at the technical aspects of service delivery. Based on fieldwork, I studied 2 aspects of the program: direct outcomes, that is coverage among village households, employment provided per year, and the extent of appropriation of the program. The second thing I'll look at is transformative impacts. There's a marginal literature that does this, looking at transformative impacts as pro-laboring class change or the ability to challenge caste hierarchies. I have defined transformative impacts as those that expand the positive freedoms of labor, that is its bargaining power and its ability to act collectively in pursuit of shared interests. These are collective freedoms that are freedoms or unfreedoms of one class relative to the other. Getting into my findings. Okay. Getting into my findings, the first finding is one that echoes what several scholars of the NREGS point out, that the implementation of this nationally funded social program varies widely from one location to the other. Now, looking at what I defined as direct outcomes, the table shows that in one set of villages, the social program covered 55 to 60% of the village households. Notably, these were marginalized households, both in terms of class and caste. That is, landless households and significantly low caste, scheduled caste households. Levels of appropriation were relatively low. There was corruption in all the locations, but it was relatively low. Compare this to the weak outcomes in the other set of villages. The social program barely covers 17% in one village and 24% of the village households in the other. Many opt out, especially landless and low caste households. In one village, the low caste are entirely excluded. We will return to this later, but for now, let us note that the villages with strong outcomes are both the ones that are characterized as polarized and remote, while the weak are the peasant-dominated and integrated households. I will Okay, I will start off here again by noting that both sets of villages with strong and direct outcomes also had strong transformative impacts. What did this entail? First, in both villages, the wage was higher relative to the other village in the same region. I had to compare in pairs because there's huge regional variation in wages. By region, I mean districts. This was counterintuitive. For instance, wages were higher in the village with high migration despite tighter labor markets, or wage was atypically higher in the village with relatively low agricultural productivity. Qualitative accounts help shed more light on this. In the research here, workers reported routinized and coordinated bargaining processes. This cut across caste groups, which is a signal achievement in India, where people tend to go to work and definitely live in caste-segregated groups. The relative strength of organization was also higher in the strong set, where the organization was truly multi-caste. In the weak villages, there was no routinized or coordinated bargaining processes in the year. Labor organization was weak and did not encompass the diversity in the working population of the villages. It completely excluded low caste in one village and relatively so in the other. Now, to understand why these direct outcomes and transformative impacts were different, we turn the analysis back to the level of processes, that is class struggle. Taking a disaggregated approach to the social relations of production, we look at class struggle in the relations in production and the relations around production. Now, in the relations around production, that is around the implementation of the social program, we see that labor organizations or unions have organized mates. Mates are leaders of worker groups in NREGs. They're just called mates, right? They've trained them to demand work, both using negotiations, filing complaints, petitions at multiple levels of the state, taluk, even zilla, inside and outside the village, and using more confrontational means such as protest, gheraos, and sit-ins. And some of the comrades even locked the officials in when they didn't get work. These leaders often interact with leaders from other villages and learn a lot from their interaction beyond the village. Their interventions included timing of when NREGS work is allocated. Local states do not like to allocate during agricultural season in order to avoid wage pressure for employers. It also included negotiating terms of work, intervening when hazardous work is allocated, seeking compensations when there are injuries, facilities for workers to rest and women workers, and caste discrimination in work allocation. For instance, in one village, the local state tried to, and successfully did, break worker unity by allocating what are regarded as caste jobs, that is cleaning the burial ground, in order to break the union. Going into in the relations and production, this is where you see the effects of the social wage materialize with the laboring class organization using the NREGS strategically to increase bargaining power on the farm. It also allows the unions to consolidate solidarities using the NREGS as a strategic resource. This is illustrated in the quotation in the next slide. I will allow you to read this quotation from an interview with Sarojamma, a union leader who is from a landless household that belongs to the ultra-marginalized scheduled caste. Here she talks about the multifaceted struggles they engage in claiming the program. She talks about how the struggles are iterative. In the second part of the quotation, she talks about the struggles involved in keeping the union together in the context of a caste-segmented society. In this village, we saw something that she calls, in quotes, unprecedented, and something she did not expect to see in her lifetime, in quotes. The upper caste in the union supported the union's campaign against an instance of upper caste violence. Of caste violence. She attributes this to the fact that the upper caste poor knew that they had to stay in the union to access the social program and also to bargain against employers. So the NREGS acts as a leverage to keep building solidarities. This is also observed to a lesser extent in the other village that I characterized as a strong impact and outcome. Let us contrast this excerpt with one from the weak cases to show how the NREGS worker is frustrated and does not think the union at present is capable of getting him NREGS work. The union was strong previously, but not so strong anymore, he says. He calls the NREGS a fixed match. He would rather focus on other forms of livelihood, including commuting for work, which was an option for him. So what do class struggles in the weak set of villages look like? In the relations around production, the class struggles are ineffective at the time that I'm studying. There is a temporal aspect to this. The unions met with high initial success in claiming the program in the initial years around the time of introduction. Some of these struggles were confrontational. Yet over time, and by the time I am researching, that is nearly a decade into the introduction of this program, the union struggles have been rendered ineffective. It is unable to claim the program for workers, and most of the program is run by what I call the illegal state contractor nexus. In the relations in production, workers did not report instances of routinized or coordinated process of bargaining. In fact, the unions here did not use the NREJ strategically to increase bargaining power. They did not link these struggles, that is, the potential effect of the NREJs as a social wage did not materialize. In the absence of such an interaction, NREJ struggles were less effective over time as the capitalist class succeeded in co-opting and, more importantly, demobilizing labor and capturing public resources of the NREJs towards its own accumulation. What explains the qualitative differences in class struggle? I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the findings allude to the limitations of the transformative potential of social programs. This is because class struggle takes place amidst specific conditions. Here the conditions are, as we saw in the earlier slides on how I characterize the villages, the socioeconomic structure. This refers to the distribution of productive resources in the village, which it may be recalled was characterized either by relative bipolarity in the structure or a dominance of peasant production. The peasant-dominated structure suggested high socioeconomic differentiation within labor, leading to a high degree of separation among workers. The cleavages in labor was salient when it came to using the NREGS. For one, attempts to schedule the NREGs to enable wage bargaining was not as popular among a section of middle peasants, for whom high labor cost is more of a pressure point compared to marginal peasants. In the bipolar economic structure, the proximity within labor allowed the unions to forge alliances between the large landless population and the bottom peasantry, which also included a sizable number of sharecroppers. The second one is integration with the urban economy. Unions, understandably, find it hard to organize in villages with high integration. There are two facets to this, both of which are not elaborated. One, the integration of both labor reproduction through commuting migration and capitalist accumulation results in lower dependencies in the capital-labor relation. This blurs class contradictions, making it harder for unions to organize workers. These factors then shape the potential for and the intensity of class struggle in particular ways. Also class struggle from above, but I don't get into that here. Last slide. Yeah, so takeaways, I'm going to say something that may not match here. The research echoes scholarship in finding that the social program contributed to the reproduction of class relations in one set of villages, while it challenged the same in another. The social program and social relations of production are mutually co-constitutive. That is, the social program is structured by production relations, even as its implementation can potentially contribute to transforming them. The social program acted as a social wage. It shaped the reproduction of labor by providing it resources and leverage to expand its positive freedoms. But this was not automatic. It had to be organized, in this case, by rural unions. Thus, in contexts where labor is weak, the space for class struggle may be carved in diverse ways. Rural unions may pit their struggles against the local state, which is significantly controlled by local capitalists, to demand public resources. Labor may then use what are both economic and political resources to confront capital on its terms of employment. This may trigger or reinforce a dynamic towards the collectivization or organization of labor, allowing it to sustain its organization, notably in these cases cutting across segmentations, most importantly caste. This in turn strengthens struggles to claim the NREGs. These mutually reinforcing class struggles and the relations in production and the relations around production were key to the transformative impacts on the social relations of production. These impacts, I'd like to note that these impacts are nascent and these struggles are iterative. Lastly, the research showed that the social program is a site of class struggle, the conditions of which were defined by the socio-economic context. In this case, the economic structure and the integration of villages with the wider economy. Thank you so much for listening to me.
So I would like to thank FS for giving me this opportunity. The title of this paper is Class Dynamics of Accumulation and Livelihood Strategies in Rural India, and it is based upon data collected from Haryana. I think in a regulation, Professor Ramachandran has said a very important thing about peasantry. He said peasantry is now, it is a community which is resilient to capitalism. I absolutely agree that this is the community. I want to add one more point. It is not only resilient, but it has evolved over a period of time to accommodate or to get accommodated in a capitalistic economic structure. So if this community has evolved over a period of time, then I think the methodology to differentiate peasantry should also be evolved. So the methodology that we are using in this study is different from the methodology that majority of people have used to differentiate peasantry. So we have accounted for, so I can give you a detail later, but this is a different methodology that we have used. So the questions that I would like to address, so one thing that I would like to say, that the rural life is determined by much more interplay of much more complex forces than before. So 2-3 questions which are important for us. Is land losing its importance in rural life? If yes, is it true that it is losing importance for all agricultural classes? And if yes, then the question is, what are the implications of that on accumulation and livelihood strategies of peasantry? Second question is, what is the meaning of interplay of complex forces in a livelihood strategy of peasantry? What is the meaning of this? So, and what role they play in accumulation and livelihood strategies? So, the data, as I mentioned, the data is collected from Haryana, and answer to these questions is embedded in 2 questions that I will directly try to address. One is, what are the accumulation strategies of well-to-do peasantry in rural Haryana? Second is, what are the livelihood strategies of rural poor in Haryana? And I think the most important question that when we study diversification is not what their livelihood strategy is. The most important question is, what are the implications of these strategies on rural inequality, poverty, and household structure? So my first point, so I will talk about rich. So there are 2-3 things which are important about rich peasantry in rural Haryana. One, they own significant proportion of modern means of production. So in a rural Haryana, or I would say that in North India, machinery plays a key role in agricultural production. Production is highly mechanized. So they own disproportionately high amount of agricultural machinery, and they often lease in land to expand their scale of production. And they lease out machinery to poor peasantry to earn money. They use hire in labor for cultivation. And other thing, that family members of these households, they are not involved in cultivation. Most of them, either they drive machinery or they manage production affairs. Other important point, female children of these households, they don't work on farm. So this is their agriculture. And majority of production, they sell at minimum spot price in the market. Majority of output. And reinvestment in agriculture is not a profitable activity for them. So the important question is where they pass their surplus. They believe that reinvesting surplus in agricultural machinery or other things which they already have is no more profitable activity. So this is the character of their agriculture. And what is the character of their non-agriculture? So in non-agriculture, I think 2 things are important in non-agriculture in case of this class. One, they diversify at village level. Some of them, they diversify in nearby towns and cities. So where they diversify in village, Dairy farming is important activity that they diversify. And I said machinery, purchasing a big combine for harvesting or earning money is a good activity for them to accumulate. They don't, the other thing is that medical shops, other shops are very important in case of this class. In urban areas, they prefer formal jobs. They are not risk takers because they are not in crisis. They prefer formal jobs. They go to city only if there is a job available. Or formal, particularly, majority of them, I say, formal job. And the other problem is that the one village that we have studied is dominated by the Rajputs. They don't work in factories. There is a caste thing in this class, right? So they don't do informal jobs, right? The other thing is that the interesting thing about this class as well as for poor classes, if you see the average age who work in farming, men, is above 45 years. The average age which work in non-farm is about 34 to 33 years. So young people from these households, they don't farm. They don't like agriculture. They love doing job either in urban area or a formal sector job. They don't like cultivation. So this is very interesting in case of this class. Well-educated youth. These are the things that people generally talk about. This is not interesting. The interesting point is, what are the political aspects of accumulation? People don't often talk about political aspects of accumulation, and I will give a 2-3 minutes to this. I think political aspects of accumulation of this class is very important. If you see, all the rural institutions are actually hijacked by this class. They are school committee, cooperative society committee, Gurdwara, Mandir, all the important institutions are led by this class. Second important thing, they have very good connections with mainstream political parties. And the meetings of these parties are generally held in their homes. And they have a good connection with MLA, local MLA. And so they use this connection to adjust some of their family members or relatives in formal sector or contractual jobs. For example, contractual teacher, contractual policeman. They often use this. The other thing which is very important, politically important, is they attract migrant laborers because they have a place at their tubal to give them a free accommodation, right? So this is interesting thing about this class. So last point about this class is, what are the implications of this livelihood, this accumulation strategy? I said that they don't love urban business, maybe due to caste or these things. Implication is that men from these households, they are involved in relatively better jobs in urban areas, and household is not fractured in case of this class. They come back in the evening and they don't need to stay in an urban center because they are not in crisis. They have option. They have option. Either they want to go to the city or not. It is up to them. So this is not a compulsion. And women, I said, women, they don't work on farm, right? And they don't want to live in a city because land as an identity play a very important role in case of this class in their villages. So this is one. Now, quickly moving to small and poor peasant households. So there was a very interesting point that, I don't want to use numbers, but I think a little bit numbers. So percentage of net farm income to total income in case of these farmers, small and poor. In case of poor, it is 18%. And in case of small, it is 39%. So does that mean there is a depeasantization? I say that this is not depeasantization of household. This is depeasantization of income. Let me give you another number. If you look into their GVO, gross value of output from agriculture, in poor, it is 37%. And in case of small, it is 60%. So they are diversifying income, but they are not leaving agriculture as a household. So now the important point is that the earner from these households, they moved to urban centers. And the pressure on remaining members has increased to maintain agriculture. So for example, the feminization of agricultural work is explicitly visible in case of these farmers. The other interesting question is how they manage their agricultural production. So I said that women, children, and elderly people, they manage their agricultural affairs. And a decent proportion of their income. So they lease in also, they lease in land also. And a decent proportion of the income that they earn from leased in land, it goes to the rent or to the rent to the machinery. So the question I asked, or we asked, the question is that why you do agriculture? The important answer is that if they leave agriculture and move to the city or town, the price of food, the price of vegetables, the price of milk is very high. And agriculture is playing a key role for these households to escape poverty. So this is a very important mean of livelihood. They can't leave agriculture. So this is important point in case of this. The other important point is why depeasantization of income in case of these households? Why? There are two reasons. One is retreat of the state from agrarian affairs. Right? So state is not providing enough, or state is using non-discriminatory policy in subsidies. The major chunk of subsidies goes to the large farmers. So for example, one farmer is selling 100 quintals of wheat in the market, other is selling 20 quintals of wheat. Who is getting the maximum benefits from MFC or those things, right? So this is very important. They are not getting enough. The other thing is that their dependency on rich farmers has increased over time. They are dependent on rich for cultivation, for machinery and other things. The other thing which is important is the demonstration effect from rich peasantry. Their members who work in cities are earning a good income. So that demonstration effect play a key role to send somebody to the urban area. The other important question is, where from non-farm income comes in case of these households? Where from non-farm income comes? In case of majority, so let me give you another number. We calculated total earners in poor peasants and small peasants. Out of 257 total earners in poor peasants' households, 146 work in informal sector. And out of 146 members in small peasants, only 20 works in informal sector. So, which means there is a two type of diversification in case of these households. You call upward diversification, where some are entered into formal jobs, better business, earning a little bit higher income, and downgraded diversification, where they are involved in informal jobs. And if you calculate the average wage rate that they earn from informal jobs, because informal jobs or the casual jobs are not available on daily basis. So if you divide the wages with the number of standard days, then their average wage rate is less than the average wage rate of even the agricultural worker. But they're bound to do this. So who does non-agriculture from these households? Predominantly men. They go to nearby city and town. And what are the implications of this? The implications is, one is feminization of agriculture, I mentioned earlier. The other is, household in case of these farmers is more fractured. Men have to live sometime in city or a town to avoid commuting cost. So these households are more fractured. They have to live there, young people, sometime. And the other thing which is important, the question that I will leave, I think the important question is diversification good or bad? So in case of these households, so I haven't calculated because I'm still struggling with the numbers. So one thing that I like to calculate is, do I think that the diversification has reduced rural inequality in case of these farmers? So if these are diversifying, has it reduced rural inequality? So this is one thing that is very important. And the other thing which is very important, that if they are diversifying, In case of these farmers, can I justify that they are diversifying because of choice or because of stress? So majority of the diversification in the case of these farmers is because of stress. So even if I say that they are better off, can I justify it socially that they are better off, even if their income is high? So these are some of the points. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Aishwarya, your home place, as it
Can we start the PPT? This how will it move from this? Okay, okay. Thank you. Hello everyone. Good evening. I'm Aishwarya Prakash. I'm a PhD scholar currently at Center for Development Studies. And I am originally from Eastern Uttar Pradesh, from Varanasi district. And what I'm presenting here is part of the work I conducted for my MPhil dissertation. So it's a bit late in coming out, but I hope that you will like it and there will be some interesting comments which I can work upon. So I'll start with that. So my paper is titled The Unequal Promises of Collectivization, Re-examining Inclusion of Farmer-Producer in Farmer-Producer Companies. Okay. So with a very brief introduction. So as we all know that with the advent of neoliberal reforms, agrarian distress in the country has intensified considerably, and the small and marginal farmers have been affected mostly in a disproportionate manner. So in such situation, there's been a lot of push for collectivizing of these farmers, and it has been said that if they can be integrated into global value chains, it can help in increasing their incomes. And in view of that, when the critique comes that in this form of integration, the farmers will face exploitation because they'll be handling with global giants, it is said that if they can collectivize themselves in the form of some or the other kind of collective, it will protect them when they integrate with these global value chains. So in such scenario, the idea of a farmer-producer company has been put forward as a very ideal solution. So farmer-producer companies have been put forward as a solution which is even better than that of a cooperative. Cooperatives have had their own set of failings, I will not get into them, but FPCs have been envisioned as institutions which will incorporate corporate regulatory system with the spirit of a cooperative. So they are registered under the Companies Act, and but they function with the principle of a cooperative where they have one member, one vote. So regardless of the numbers of shares held by any shareholder, each shareholder gets equal voting rights, but it gets covered under the regulatory mechanism of the Companies Act. So hence, any dysregulation, etc., all of that is taken care of. So in that way, it is believed to be like a win-win sort of model, and it is strongly backed by actors, donor agencies, and even among academic circles. Also, I have not mentioned here, but important to note that even the people who critique the FPC model mostly limit their critique to the profitability part of it and how profitable can FPCs be, how long-standing they can be. Mostly critique is limited to that part. The institutional aspects of FPCs are not really looked into with as much detail as I believe they should be. So with this, we come to the focus of my study. So the study is drawing on critical agrarian literature, and we try to question that what happens when these institutions, this institutional model meets the lived realities of rural feudal India and the realities of caste hierarchies, land inequality, and the gender divisions of labor. So the fundamental concern we try to answer here is that who gets to participate in these institutions, in what ways and on whose terms, and who do these institutions work for and at what cost. So the paper argues that FPCs often function less as spaces of collective empowerment and more as arenas where existing inequalities are reproduced or at best selectively negotiated. And participation, far from being neutral, is structured by one's own location within the agrarian hierarchy of caste, class, and gender. So in this context, we come to the research method. So we conducted a ethnographic exploration of 3 FPCs operating in the eastern Uttar Pradesh part of India. And this fieldwork was conducted between August and October 2019. We selected 3 cases representing 3 different pathways through which FPCs are promoted. One was an FPC promoted by NABARD, the other an FPC promoted by SFAC, which is the Small Farmers Agribusiness Consortium, the nodal agency for promoting of for FPCs as assigned by the government. And we also had one FPC which was promoted by an individual. So the data was collected through a mix of semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions, and also some participant observation of the meetings of the FPCs taking place. And we tried to include both men and women across different caste lines and class lines in the sample. In addition to this, interviews were conducted with members of board of directors, with the research institutions who were assigned to be for the promotion of these FPCs. And further, we also analyzed policy documents and guidelines to better understand what were exactly the aims with which the government was going ahead with the push for promotion of these FPCs. So I'll give you a brief introduction of my 3 cases. So the first case is that of Pragati Gram Fresh Producer Company, which is operating in eastern Uttar Pradesh. So all of these 3 FPCs of mine, they are operating in vegetable marketing. I particularly chose them because vegetable marketing is one of the most important interventions probably needed in agriculture, because vegetables have such a volatile price range and there is no MSP associated. So this was in larger, in view of my larger questions that I raised in my MPhil dissertation. So for that I chose PCs only operating in vegetable farming. So this Pragati Gram Fresh is the PC operating in vegetable farming in eastern Uttar Pradesh with the highest level of turnover at the time when I did the study. So this PC, their focus was on vegetable marketing, and they had some urban retail linkages. They had developed a mobile app through which they were taking orders from residents of the city and would do doorstep delivery. They also had a retail outlet from which they were selling their products. They also had some tie-ups with some hostels, hostel kitchens, and some restaurants for bulk supply purposes. So in all of this, they had a good running business or system altogether, but we will see how well it was benefiting the member farmers later. And yes, of course, at times they procured from their member farmers, but at times when the demand was not being met by the produce, they would also procure from the open market. And then we have the Kashi Vishwanath FPC, which was promoted by SFAC. It had an SHG-like model. Let's stick to knowing that. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not moving it here. Okay, yeah. So the Kashi Vishwanath FPC was promoted by SFAC, and it had a SHG and FIG based model, where they first went and formed SHGs and FIGs saving groups basically on the ground to help the farmers collect some money together so they could purchase the shares, and later they were incorporated into the company. It's important to note that this particular PC had nearly 60% women shareholders. So it became a very interesting case like that. It operated a wholesale shop in the city where it purchased from the farmers and then sold to the retailers. It also had an input supply shop where it was selling things like pesticides and fertilizers, etc. Then we had the final company, which is promoted by a particular individual. We'll come to this later. So together these cases reveal the diverse institutional form that FPCs can take. We'll come to the findings now. So one major thing that I came across in my study was that land holding played a very significant role in shaping the association, in the sense where how. Okay. So in the sense of how these people associated with the company itself. So the large landowners, they, particularly in Pragati Particularly in case of Pragati Gram Fresh, we could see this very predominantly because it had a set of two different kind of landowners. One were large landowners who are producing grains and the small landowners who are producing vegetables. So the grain landowners, they interacted less with the company and the vegetable ones interacted more regularly. But the larger landowners, they had a much better sense of ownership when it came to the company. They said statements like, we believe the company is ours, and it's okay if we have some losses in the short run. In the long run, if the company makes profits, the money will come back to us. So they had very clear sense of ownership and association with the company. They also showed a very great sense of admiration for the company in this way that, anyway, I'll come to this was the main idea of this, and then, so land holding shaped access, perceptions and confidence. Larger farmers saw FPCs as institutions that they could shape, while smaller landowners prioritized immediate cash returns. Also, smaller landowners did not believe that they did not express any willingness to become in the managerial positions in the company or board of directors, etc. We believe that it was, they themselves said that, they believe that they did not have the time or headspace to participate into this because they had more things on their plate. So, second, we come to the idea of caste within the producer company. Here again, one very important thing to note is class and caste are all, of course, very correlated in our country. But class in rural India is mostly about having access to land. But caste overpowers that in some other ways as well. Because, for example, we see that, So one of the clearest instances that we saw during our FGDs was that the Dalit farmers and OBC farmers from non-dominant castes refused to sit on the same seating space as the advantaged caste farmers. That itself spoke a lot of volume, because when people are not even willing to share space with each other, how can we expect them to operate in a company where they're supposed to be having equal member, equal vote? So how are they supposed to have equal voice if they're not even willing or capable to share the same seating space as them? We also saw instances where they would refer, mostly the Dalit farmers were sharecroppers or tenants on the lands of these large landowners. So in such situation, with such power hierarchy in place, it was impossible to imagine that they would have equal voice within the company. We saw instances where they would refer to their landowners as Malik. Malik is a Hindi word that translates to owner. That is not the language that one would use for an employer, ideally. So that shows that how much feudal relations are still part of our setup, and how, without addressing them, we cannot expect that a company in a FPC kind of setup, actual, solidarities of any kind can be formed. Similarly, when we come to gendered barriers to meaningful participation, again we saw that because of time poverty and women's inability to take decisions with regard to where things are being sold, etc. Even though women themselves were the actual farmers, all decisions were being taken by the men. Also, we saw an instance where the company decided to change its office location. And because of that, a lot of women got excluded from the meetings because the office was far off. The company had no ill intentions, but because it forgot to take into account that, men and women will not always have the same needs, because of that, women ended up getting excluded. So this is a very clear example of how, until and unless we address problems and remember to address them, if we go by default setups, the vulnerable groups will end up getting excluded. So we come to the Shivansh Krishak Producer Company, very interesting example. Upper caste male farmer, very highly landed, and he ended up capturing the entire institution with himself. So what he did was he purchased all the shares in the names of his sharecroppers without informing them, putting his own money. And so, in effect, the company had marginal landless farmers as its shareholders. And because of that, he was able to capture a large part of so he could apply for schemes which were actually meant for small and marginal farmers, but he ended up benefiting from them individually. And his whole thing was that, anyway, I'm bringing benefit to the village, so how does it matter? But of course, we know it matters. So we come to the conclusion part here. I'll just take another minute, just a minute. Yeah. So just the conclusion part. So the ASA booklet, which talks about the formation of FPCs, says that field work needs to be carried out at the time of formation of FPCs to understand that who talks to whom and what power relations work on ground. But in our talks with the research institutions, we found that nothing of this sort was happening on the ground, mostly because these people did not have the time to do it. They had very targets put on them where they had to set up producer companies very quickly. So they did not get time to work on ground and build actually any kind of real solidarities. And this is again in sharp contrast with how Amul was founded with, not a top-down but a bottom-up approach, where it was founded on the base of a social movement. So if something like that is lacking, the probability that a collective will work goes down. We have another example where in 2021, during the hype of the farmer protest, the government of India released, the PIB released a press bulletin where they called that Atmanirbharta and Krishi is the buzzword. But the question is that this Atmanirbharta will come at what account? If these FPOs are the units on which this Atmanirbharta is based, then these FPOs need to be more socially conscious, they need to be more inclusive, and they can only happen when they are actively made to be that way. There's nothing like neutral. You have to be anti-caste, you have to be pro-gender, only then you can create a neutral space. So that is the idea that I'm trying to put forward. And with that, I'll conclude that we don't dismiss the potential of FPCs, but we argue that the ability to deliver on their promise remains deeply concentrated by the social realities within which they operate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. You're presenting, yeah? Well done.
Hello, good evening. My name is Anjana Kesav. I'm a first-year PhD scholar at Center for Development Studies. The paper I am presenting here today is titled Beyond the Poverty Line, Examining the Structural Roots of Agrarian Vulnerability in India, which has been co-written with Sachin Varghese Titti, also a PhD scholar at Center for Development Studies. So this paper is still in its developmental phase, and we wish to share some of our preliminary findings for your valuable feedback. So the objective of our study is to understand agrarian vulnerability, and by that what we mean is the possibility that an agricultural household will become or remain poor in the foreseeable future. And for the purpose of our current presentation, we have taken the SAS 2018-19 definition of agricultural households, and therefore we concede that there will be some inadvertent omissions committed. So the definition is as given here, which is those households whose value of agricultural production from self-employment activities during the last 365 days is greater than 4,000. Those are the households in consideration. Okay, so the primary question here is why study vulnerability when the poverty count is so high as per our calculations itself. So you might notice that the count that we have is much higher than the official count, and almost in line with what was discussed in many of the papers in the conference so far. And we have not used the World Bank measure or the official India measure, of which there is no fixed definition. We have used one is an income-based poverty line, which has been developed by Bakshi and Modak 2017, which is based on minimum wage, and another is also is based on consumption, and that is developed by Abhinav Surya, Setu and Rutu, also brought out by FAS, and both of them shows that the poverty currently is more than 60% among agricultural households. So that is the question. So why do we study vulnerability? Our answer is this is an extension, a theoretical extension to the poverty discourse, and our primary contention is that this will enable us to question the sustainability of the achieved outcomes and question the existing measurement, and also by extension the alleviation frameworks, because we believe that alleviation frameworks are placed in the greater context of the developmental framework itself. So it will enable us to question the growth model that is being followed over the years. So, and we finally also, we also want to study what keeps households in poverty and what factors can potentially push a household into poverty while also safeguarding a few. So we want to see whether improvements, and we are not denying that there aren't any improvements. In fact, in the previous session, we saw that there are some improvements. So whether improvements, however limited, and even if not leading to social mobility, are at least sustainable. There sure are improvements, but are they sustainable is what we're trying to ask. Okay, and the next question, of course, is why study the agricultural sector? And in this conference, I don't think there is a lot of explanation needed for that question. The sector itself is quite volatile as it is. It is a characteristic property of the sector. There is inadequacies in public investment, credit availability, other forms of governmental interventions are virtually absent. It is iniquitous. There is decline in real agricultural incomes, proletarianization, depeasantization, repeasantization are all features of the sector. And when we look into household level poverty data, even when referring to other data sets, we see that a work by Utsa Patnaik that came out in 2024 shows that as much as 80% of the rural population, as per the suppressed 2017-18 HCS data, consume below calorie norms. Shukla's 2025 calculation based on the same data set that we are using show that close to 70% agricultural households earn less than average of 5,000 as farm income, 44% less than 2,000, 27% less than 1,000. This is annual we are talking about. And Ranganathan has shown in 2012, based on 2012 SAS data, that 53.37% of farm household earned incomes below the poverty line. So this is not a new thing we are saying. This has been a feature of the sector. This is being talked about, so we wish to continue the debate. Okay, so now we look at some general patterns of vulnerability. So here we are looking at how APL and BPL households are distributed across different size classes. We are using the marginal small, semi-medium, medium and large that is generally used in the literature, where marginal stands for less than 1 hectare, small 1 to 2 hectare, semi-medium 2 to 4, medium 4 to 10 and large greater than 10. And as you can see, APL and BPL categories are of course spread across the hectare. And of course, logically, the APL categories are greater in the larger size classes and smaller in the lower size classes. But here the question that we are trying to ask is the APL in the smaller size class the same as the APL in the higher size classes? Are their incomes the same? Are their stabilities the same? That is the question we wish to raise over here. And that is the first question. The second question is, why are there BPL classes in the larger size classes if land can ensure better income status? So those are the two questions that we wish to raise over here. And another point I would like to bring here is, while income and consumption data represents an outcome variable, land ownership is an explanatory variable that impacts income and we believe is more structural. So that is why we thought this would be an important graphical representation. Therefore, we contend that insights are arising out of analysis using BPL versus APL categories and size classes are fundamentally different. So moving forward, we'll be looking at both how each feature varies across BPL, APL, and also how these features vary across different size classes, because we believe the interpretations arising out of it are different. Because the former is APL, BPL based interpretations is limited measures of agricultural household stability, and those based on size classes is points to deeper structural features of agricultural households. Okay, so the first we are looking at consumption income gap. So for this we have used SAS data. Monthly household income is taken as sum of wages, pension/remittances, rent on land, net income from agriculture, which includes crop production and livestock farming, and net income from non-farm business. Monthly household consumption expenditure is taken directly from SAS. Of course, we concede that that is not a very appropriate measure of consumption because SAS is not supposed to give you a comprehensive measure of consumption, but that is what we have taken because consumption measure is not available for 2018-19. But I think the finding that comes out of it is relevant still. So the consumption income gap is observable across agricultural households monthly. The gap is quite visible. And this is not a new thing. Patnaik, as far as back in 2007, using 2002-3 data, has also pointed to the same anomaly, showing that as much as 96% of the agricultural households could not meet their consumption with the income that they earned. And Baxi 2022 had also arrived at a similar conclusion using the previous SAS data. So we believe this is an indication of possible vulnerability existing. Next indication we see in terms of loan characteristics. For this, we look at the purpose for which loans are availed, source from which they are availed, and debt to income ratio. The next slide we'll also be seeing loan tenures and interest rates. Okay, so yeah, the distribution of source of loans, we see that they are largely similar between APL and BPL, whereas between marginal and large, they vary a lot. What needs, I would like to invite your attention to the fact that about 40% of the loans for marginal, for APL and BPL are taken for consumption needs. So this has to be read in line with what we saw in the previous slide, where we see that their income is not enough to meet their consumption. So, and 40% of their loan is used for consumption needs. So that connects. Next, and out of the 60% that they do avail for productive investment, close to half is used for revenue expenditure and not in increasing or in improving their productivity of their farms in any manner. And when you look at size class based patterns, we see that marginal avail majority of their loans to finance basic consumption expenses. Again, not to improve their income status in any manner, just to meet consumption needs. And large, who are the best of the lot, they use 80% of their loans are for productive needs, but out of that, only 68% is used for revenue expenditure, which means it is not for further business improvement. Next, we look at debt to income ratio. We see that it's greater than 1 for all land ownership classes, implying across the board they get they borrow above their income. Now what we note here is that between APL and BPL, which is the lesser category, has greater debt to income ratio. But for size classes, we see that it is fairly similar, but it is but it is greater for the more better of class, which is large. We believe this is because in BPL, the higher debt to income ratio is explained by the lower income, whereas for, okay, I'll just move on. Okay, so in interest rate also we see similar, what we see is APL and BPL behave similarly, whereas marginal and large, we see that marginal, the difference is mostly observed in between marginal and large, even though APL and BPL behave similarly. Yeah, I'll speed through. Next, we will look at asset composition. We believe this is important because asset or wealth is a better indication of stability rather than income. So we are also looking at asset, and even there we see that, of course, large is better off than marginal, but a majority of the asset they own are buildings and constructions, and not really any sort of productive assets. Okay, income composition also has some interesting insights. For BPL and APL classes, the share of agricultural income and wage incomes are considerably close, but BPL we see is slightly more dependent on agricultural incomes than APL. Higher APL incomes are financed through remittance, rent, and non-farm business. And diversification into livestock and non-farm business is seen among marginal. Higher dependence on wage incomes more than crop income is seen for lower size classes, which is intuitive. And this is contrasted by the opposite trend observed for higher size classes, where the crop income is larger than the wage income. Okay, now we have also tried to model vulnerability using a modified form of a model given by Gunther and Hartigan in 2009, which is built on another model given by Chowdhury Jalan and Surihadi in 2002. So based on this, we arrive at a vulnerability score. I'll not be going into the specifics of the model, but basically what they're trying to do is, the model that they propose uses consumption as the variable, but we are using income. So what they're trying to do is how the current, using cross-sectional data, they try to see how the current cross-sectional income can predict what the distribution of income can be like in the future, to see whether a particular household will be poor or not, or poor or remain the same in the future. That is the crux behind the model. And based on that, we find the following. There is a monotonic decrease in vulnerability as we move from small to large farmer, as is evident from the leftward shift and the decreasing median of the distribution, and higher variances observed in lower size classes, indicating their proneness to income shocks, meaning their current stable positions can fluctuate. So as we move for higher size classes, the chance that they will become poor in the future is lesser as compared to lower size classes. And the second one, this table here shows the average vulnerability scores of APL households within the different size classes. And we see that as we move from the lowest size class up to the highest size class, the vulnerability score reduces. So again, the same pattern is repeated. And this is the observed poverty rate versus the vulnerability score, where we see that for marginal, for instance, the observed poverty rate is 0.62, average vulnerability score is 0.72. So average vulnerability score shows that given the current circumstances, there was a 72% chance that that household could have been poor, but currently it is 62. So that's how vulnerable they are to poverty. And finally, loan characteristics. Higher vulnerability scores has been shown. We see that higher vulnerability scores corresponds to higher reliance on informal sources, higher debt to income ratio, higher borrowing for consumption needs, higher and more spread out interest rates across size classes, all of which we saw earlier. So vulnerability score is an accurate predictor. Wrapping it up. Vulnerability score is accurate. We see that it's a good predictor of their instability. And finally, this is the last slide. Okay, so the model also helps you find out the kind of shock that the household will be exposed to. There are two kinds of shock that the model predicts, a covariate shock and an idiosyncratic shock. And a covariate shock are those that are caused by community level problems and or structural reasons. So we see that our model shows that for lower size classes, marginal and small, it is the covariate or structural reasons that causes their vulnerability, whereas for the higher size classes, it is idiosyncratic, that is more household level features that leads them to vulnerability, meaning that structural reasons matter a lot when it comes to their income stability or stability in general. And with that, I conclude. Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay, I'll just get started. Is this okay? I hope I'm not speaking too much into the mic. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to FAS for the opportunity to present here, and to this wonderful team of volunteers who made sure that we've all got to the right place at the right time, given how many sessions are happening. I'm very mindful of the fact that John has a flight to catch, so I'll cut straight to the chase. So that's okay. I mean, that's a rather grand title, but it's based on my ethnographic fieldwork in Madhya Pradesh and MP. I'm going to cut through a lot of this because I think all of us are indeed familiar with this. But the one thing that I do want to point out is that one of the solutions, as it were, to the agrarian crisis that has been promoted by the World Bank and many other policymakers has been this business with contract farming, and much of it has happened with high-value horticulture crops. And I think I spotted Sudha Narayan somewhere here, and she's written extensively on this and pointed to several problems that others have too. But what I want to do as an anthropologist is to look at what might a successful case look like, and what might it look like with a class of large farmers, a social elite class in Madhya Pradesh, and with the food grain. So this is basmati paddy. So Madhya Pradesh is, of course, it's right there, and that's the district map. And the district that I studied is called Hoshangabad, now renamed to Narmadapuram. So I'll sort of shift between the two. This is the map of the district, and I just want to point out that I worked here primarily in Piparia town and in two villages, so one in Suakpur and one in Piparia. But a lot of my work was based in Piparia town because it is the largest APMC in the district, so in terms of procurement volume, sales, so on and so forth. Right, so there are particularly unique features with Madhya Pradesh. It is relatively understudied, but it seems to present, at least superficially, in terms of the numbers, it seems to be doing much better in the neoliberal era of agrarian crisis than other states. And that's part of the reason I got into MP. Now, something significant that happened in MP, or particular districts in MP rather, I should say, is extensive state intervention in irrigation, in electrification, and a series of infrastructural developments, all to make agriculture profitable from a period when there was only one crop cultivated right into the, say, early 1980s. Today in Narmadapuram in Hoshangabad, they do 3 crops, as I've put it down there. So it's kharif, basmati paddy. In the Rabi season, it's wheat, and increasingly they mix it up with chana, chickpeas, and in the summer there's a 60-day moong crop. Now the basmati paddy is cultivated for export markets. Wheat is played between private players in APMC depending on the prices, and the moong is exclusively sold at MSP and at a fairly high price. Why did basmati even emerge in MP in the first place? Because historically it is associated with the Punjab, the Indo-Gangetic plains. The soybean crop collapsed in 2010 due to a crop disease. And what's happened with basmati is that you have segmented markets. I mean, so there's segmented cultivation patterns across the district and in neighboring districts too, but I'll stick to Hoshangabad. So what you have, varieties such as 11, 21, 17, 18, 1509, cultivated for the Middle East markets because they're longer grain, and it's for biryani and pulav, basically. And what you have is Pusa Basmati 1, PB1, and a hybrid Pusa 1886 that's almost exclusively, I'm told, cultivated in MP for EU and North American markets. And these are cultivated in contract farming arrangements, which are locally known as the project. So I'll just refer to that as a project. And why is it that they have to differentiate this? It is to ensure minimum residue levels of pesticides required for export to the EU. Now, within Hoshangabad, if you remember the administrative the sort of division, the PB1 varieties are cultivated exclusively in Sohagpur and Piparia, and the dominant caste, in the old sense of the term, numerically dominant, politically dominant in terms of large land holdings, are this group called the Gujars. So they're an OBC caste group. Since the emergence of Basmati paddy, elite classes, as we historically, as in the Green Revolution states too, they started diversifying. And one of the primary avenues for doing so was into agrochemical retailing. Pesticide shops, I'll just call them that. There's a reason for this, I'll get to that. And one of the reasons Basmati expanded in the district, or rather these blocks, not so much the district, was the centrality of caste and kinship ties. And over the past 2 days, we've been speaking a lot about the centrality of at least caste and gender, these social institutions, as quite central to capitalist accumulation. And as an anthropologist, what I'm particularly interested in is what happens to them when they get caught up in transformative market relations, in a competitive market economy. So we know that they're quite central, but what happens, right? So that's sort of what motivates my research. So I'll just sort of, what I'll do is now describe the project, what I call the official narrative that firms tell me, right? It's not farmers who tell me this, it's the firms. And by firms, I mean rice millers and exporters. right? They combine two functions. So they have a preference for larger farmers over 24 acres. They tie up with local agrochemical retailers who, of course, are clients of global and national agrochemical companies such as Syngenta, Bayer, Coromandel, so on and so forth. They enroll cultivators by the end of August through verbal agreements. So far I've not spotted any written agreements. So in fact, there are no written agreements, and this has been spotted in other cases too. And they're locally referred to as Sauda, an agreement. The other stipulation is that the crop, basmati crop, has to be harvested physically with the use of labor. You can't use a combine harvester as they do in other parts of the district because they fear that it damages the grain. Now the produce is then checked for MRLs post-harvest. So 1 to 2 kg samples are sent to different firms by agrochemical retailers, and they check them for MRLs. And if they're passed, they're procured by the firms directly from the villages. So it saves transportation costs for this elite section of farmers. Now the cultivators themselves are paid ₹100 per quintal bonus on the ongoing market price. So if the ongoing market price is $100, then they get $200. That's the basic idea. And the retailers have emerged as adatiyas, and this is quite significant because in MP in the 80s and 90s, they got rid of the kacha adatiyas, as Mekla Krishnamurthy has written about. But with the contract farming or the emergence of the project, agrochemical retailers have emerged as this new kind of adatiyas or commission agents, and they receive about 1 to 2% as commission fee for the total basmati that they procure for the firms. Now, payments to cultivators are not direct. They're routed through these agrochemical retailers who actually loan pesticides on credit throughout the cultivation cycle. So when the firms pay the agrochemical retailers, these retailers in turn deduct the amount owed to them and route the payments. They do an online payment. Now, the average cost of cultivation, this was last year. This year, it's gone up. Every year, it keeps going up, really. So 30 to 35, and I think these are underestimates, by the way. I should say that because I didn't do extensive surveys. So 30 to 35,000 per acre in the project, and between 20 to 25,000 with respect to the Middle East varieties, because you can use a combine harvester. That's the basic deal. So that's the official list, and in order to sort of substantiate these claims, you'll spot these sort of posters, and the one on, well, my left at least, right? So sustainable basmati ki kheti, it says, that's a poster by Syngenta that lists all the chemicals that ought to be avoided, and this is an example of a list that agrochemical retailers have that they share with firms, and the average sort of landholding. It's not here, but it's about nearly 40 acres. So I'll get to move on. So broadly, vertically, I would sort of say this is the organizational structure. And of course, below cultivators, you have labor. And for reasons of time, I really can't get into production relations in the farm, unfortunately. Right. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. Now, it was quite simply accidental encounters that led to Gujar participation in the project. Basically, what happened was their kin members were cultivating basmati in neighboring Raisen. They heard of this when soybean collapsed, and it spread among an elite class of cultivators, right? And some of them then started diversifying into their villages. I'm sorry, not diversifying, but including cultivators from their villages, other kin members, and started setting up agrochemical shops. And this is quite an interesting statistic, which is from 25 to 30 shops in 2015 in Piparia town. You now have 132 shops, and about 40 are owned by Gujars. And again, these are all underestimates, right? I can't. I'm sort of working through a lot of proxies, I guess. So the benefits of saving on transportation costs, bonus on a market price, the prospect of earning commissions is quite tempting, right? Subsequently, they've started enrolling middle farmers. Often the middle farmers, you won't find their names enrolled, but they're sort of clubbed together with the larger farmers. And the erstwhile merchant and trading castes, who have long been dominant in this region since 1860, benefited from colonial land settlement policies. They, in fact, moved from agrochemical shops and from working in the grain markets to setting up, in fact, 3 rice mills who also export. And you have the bigger players now operating out of Bhopal, such as Dawat. Many of the mills from Punjab and Haryana moved to MP. Right. Now, how do they, so increase cost of cultivation, one of the way they try to offset cost is to substitute expensive MNC pesticides with national, or as they call technicals. So you can see that the one on my left is Syngenta, and that costs quite a bit, and the price difference is between 1,000 to 1,500 rupees. They use the local ones. So I'll very quickly move on to what are the problems for this, right? I mean, all of what I've said so far is the official narrative, except for the last bit about substitution. That's the official narrative that a retailer will tell you. Well, one of the immediate thing that strikes the observer is the fact that the firms, or large capital, so to say, remains in the background. The business of organizing cultivation, the business of recruiting these large farmers or middle farmers into taking up the project actually falls on agrochemical retailers. They're the ones doing sort of the day-to-day running, as it were. So it's really this relation between the agrochemical retailers and, in fact, the kin and caste cultivators that's at the crux of this entire thing, right? So caste indeed is quite central to this structure of accumulation that they've benefited from. But of course, this is exactly where the conflicts are, because if things go wrong, it goes wrong within very close kin and caste circles. And so now I'll move to the unofficial sort of picture of the project. Do I have 3 minutes, John? All right, 2. All right, so one of the phrases that everyone constantly told me was, आजकल धंधे में कोई रिश्तेदार नहीं होता. Almost as if to say, पहले सब लोग रिश्तेदार थे, but the point is there are no relatives today, because you have this problem of defaulters, which is that cultivators take agrochemicals on credit and then they don't repay these retailers back. And of course, I was surprised because the official narrative that I went with told me that payments were routed through these retailers. But turns out that was not the case, because when these shops started expanding, especially among Gujars, the clients that each shop had diminished, right? And to attract more clients, these guys started, they started poaching middle farmers and others from the other shops, right? So there is a limited clientele, even if there are many shops. And one of the things that they did was to, in fact, use these technicals. So the reason that they started substituting Syngenta with technicals was to attract middle farmers, right? 1 minute? How long do I? Okay, I'm sorry. Oh God. Okay, so you have limited clientele, but it's also led to an increase in risk-taking and speculation, especially on prices. So there are 2 instances that I know where these agrochemical retailers basically told their kin, look, sell all your produce to us, we'll buy it at whatever rate, 10 rupees, and post-harvest they realized that the mills were giving them only 7 rupees. Now, obviously, they had to settle for losses or risk losing their existing clients. So there are a few things that I just sort of want to rush through, really, which is simply to say that there is an increasing preference, in fact, across castes, but I'll just stick to the Gujars, to enter into these project agreements, but the large farmers among them, the elites within this caste group, are in fact now working with the Marwadis and Sindhis because they want to avoid what they call family tension. They say, we don't want this headache, so they're moving out. This is not to say that they completely move out or that these shops are shutting down, but simply to suggest that they're working with a very limited set of, their maternal uncle's children, so on and so forth, cousins, and so on and so forth. And this has led to consolidation of the older agrochemical shops owned by the Banias and the Sindhis, who've also moved into rice mills and they're exporting. Now, the other reason for why this is so is because of the year-long demand for fertilizers in a 3-crop cycle. So although you have 132 shops, you only have 7 fertilizer dealers in Piparia, and 6 of them are non-Gujar, right? So I would sort of suggest that there has been accumulation, and there has been diversification, but it is limited. They're not finding further routes for expansion and diversification. And the MP regional state is in fact on a big industrial promotion drive, but the industries that keep coming in are from outside the state. I'm sorry I had to leave a lot out, but thank you so much for your patience.
think we can all see, very rich research papers. Yeah, I think it's great to get a sense of just how rich the kind of work that young scholars are doing in agrarian studies is. And clearly, agrarian studies is really thriving, thanks in part, I think, to FAS. I think that we can best serve these young scholars actually by just providing some feedback in the very limited time that we have left. So now I didn't succeed in saving sort of 20 minutes in the standard time, 6 minutes to 6. Perhaps we can go on till 10 past 6, but I think to just pose comments and questions to the young scholars here. And I'll just start with a few of my own questions. I have quite a lot, but I guess, Deepa, I've really said this to you privately already. I mean, I very much admire your research design. I think the question that the questions that you're asking are important ones and really interesting. And the sort of framework that you've set up is I think, a very strong one. I worry a little bit that, as I've said to you, that the findings just seem rather too neat. It all kind of seems to work out far too neatly. And I know that from what you've told me, that there is a lot more sort of complexity than you were able to show in the presentation now. And one thing which sort of worries me about it is, surely there are many situations in which the kind of polarization that characterizes two of your villages actually is conducive really to oppression on the part of the power holders and their power to suppress organization from below is overwhelming. So I'd like to sort of to tease out a little bit more just quite what the circumstances are in circumstances of polarization, there is the kind of mobilization from below that you described. Aishwarya, I like your paper very much. One thought that came to me reading your work was the thought that it's not just, perhaps not just landed power and caste that is involved here, but also something that German social democrat of many years ago called Robert Michels described as the iron law of oligarchy. The tendency within an organization for small groups to take control. Just another factor which I think you might find it worthwhile taking into account. I think I'd also like to know really a little bit more about how the regulation of the FPOs works. I guess you probably got a lot of material on that and didn't have space here to present it, but it struck me that just how the FPOs are supposed to be regulated and the ways in which perhaps the power holders are able to intervene in those processes of regulation seems to me to be an important additional dimension. Sorry, I'm going by the order of my notes, Paramjit, and anyway, I'll get to you as well. Anjana and Sachin, I I guess, you know, there's a lot of very, very careful and, you know, detailed work in your paper. I guess what sort of bothered me was that conceptually it seemed to me that, you know, sometimes poverty and vulnerability are distinguished, but that actually at important moments, you know, poverty itself seems to be vulnerability. So I'm sort of worried a little bit about a certain sort of kind of conceptual confusion there, and you know, and similarly, I think you weren't able to say very much about this in your presentation, but in the paper itself, the part of the paper in which you're discussing the impact of shocks, I felt just sort of how, well, perhaps how you are, in some sense, measuring the shocks needed to be developed somewhat. Lastly, and I hope this won't seem an unkind question, but I found myself wondering a little bit, what do you think is there anything counterintuitive in your findings? I was looking for, you know, a bit more of a puzzle, if you like, of observations that are in some way counterintuitive, which is often, you know, the origin of a puzzle. Yeah? We can perhaps talk about it on another, but that was a reaction. Paramjit, super interesting, and you know, having just spent some time back in a village I know quite well, but you know, in Tamil Nadu, a long way from Punjab, perhaps these questions come from that experience. Thinking about changes that I've observed, and of the significance of education in the story of change in agrarian production relations, social change in the villages that I know. I was struck by the fact that I don't think you mentioned anything about education. And it's thanks to education in other circumstances that I know that one gets a strong tendency for some of the rural rich to actually seek to get out of the village because they have developed bigger interests outside. So I would be interested, and in other cases we know quite a lot about the rich actually investing a lot in education. And that didn't seem, I was just struck by its absence from your presentation. And perhaps another thing that I would hope that you will have more to say on in the development, you know, the other papers you've written on your work. You mentioned the rich leasing in to increase scale of production, and you know, I'm just aware of the fact that, you know, we do have a lot of evidence of there being a much higher incidence of tenancy in the country now than not too many years ago, and I think that you know, there's a need for more study of, you know, what's going on in terms of tenancy relations and so on. If I may just mention it in this group, though I think the head honchos of FAS have now left. There's not very much, for example, about tenancy in the small farmer studies, and not always that much development of analysis of tenancy in the village studies. I'm going to pass over comment on Ashwin's work because we have discussed it quite a lot, and I think it'll be more valuable for him to hear from others in the room. So I'm sorry, I've now gone on far too long. You guys should have been saying, half a minute. Questions, please, from the floor. One, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is to Aishwarya. Aishwarya, thank you for your presentation. Just wanted to, even though you're not making a comparative between cooperatives and FPOs, is your criticism about this kind of collectivization effort, these things creeping in, will it be common for any institutional setup, or there are some structural aspects of FPCs which make it more vulnerable to certain the things that you talked about? Thank you.
Let's just keep going.
This is to Deepa. So you were talking about unions having a central role in this thing, and the way in which the strong versus the weak villages seems to be differentiated on the basis of the union, the way in which unions were. Were they the same unions? Were they different unions? Did they have different ways of operating within the villages? That would be interesting to know also.
When we look upon the income consumption gap as an indicator of vulnerability, how do you take into account the differences in the asset base? Suppose we have a household having a low gap between income and consumption, but having a high asset base in the form of human capital, social capital, and physical capital. So how do you take into account?
Thank you. Two quick questions. One for Deepa. I'm interested in how much you see that the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program is a very specific and special case. You're developing a theory that's more broadly articulated at what social programs do. And many of them obviously intervene on the distribution side, whether they're cash transfers, subsidized goods. It strikes me that MREGA is really specific because it brings a new politics of production, because it is a moment of production and distribution, which of course contradicts that separation of the economic and political, which is a characteristic form of capitalist social relations and so forth. And the moment of the state itself seems to unite those two moments together through this program. So I wondered how specific that is, or whether you're looking for a broader theory in this regard. And a really quick question for Ashwin. You noted that there's proliferation of stores, and that means there's a proliferation of credit relationships going on. Are farmers double dipping? It happened with microfinance. Are they doing it with this?
I can respond to the questions. On your question of that it looks neat, right? The thing is that what I did mention but I couldn't emphasize is that these struggles are iterative. So at the point at which I'm studying, it is a point where these struggles appear to be strong. But there have been points when these unions have had to abandon NREGS for a few years because it's not working. And these are also the villages, the polarized villages. You're right that the oppression is more, but it took me a while to figure out that it is counterintuitive, but where the oppression is more is where class contradictions are sharper. And it is easier for them to organize there, and which is why the connection between the polarized villages having stronger organization rather than the ones with peasant producers. And because I look at this through the lens of NREGS, these sort of differences are quite specific. On your question, Marcus, you asked about, is there something special about NREGS? Absolutely. I think it works as a social program. It works particularly because it is a labor market intervention. And I cannot speculate whether this theory can be advanced to other programs. However, in my fieldwork, I found that when I talk to the employers in the village, all of them, did hate the NREGS quite a bit, but they viscerally hate the PDS. You know, they hate they say the rice just makes them lazy. So I do think there is a larger case for studying these interventions as a site of class struggle or as bringing out different set of interests. So I don't know, I haven't worked on it, but I did put it in my interviews, but I left it out for my work. The third question is about the different unions. Yes, they were different unions. So mostly, I don't think they were organizationally very different. I don't think it was about, you know, a charismatic leader or these sort of things that differentiated the effectiveness of the union. And these are both affiliated to the CPM, so the programs are quite similar in what they look at. One was a peasant union, and another was the agricultural workers union. So the polarized villages had agricultural workers union because there were more agricultural workers there, and the others had peasant unions. However, as some of our comrades, and it's very special because Yashwant from the Kisan Sabha who's sitting here is actually, it's the village he was born in. He doesn't live there anymore. But with these, sorry, I lost my thread there. I think I was trying to say that it is not so much about whether it is a peasant union or an agriculture workers union, because even in the peasant unions, you only have either a marginal peasant or maybe up to somebody who has 3 acres. Peasant unions are generally small and marginal farmers and mostly marginal. So I think it isn't so much about the character of the organization, but what the organizations can do given the set of conditions they're functioning within. Okay.
Thank you all speakers. Very good.
Thank you, everyone.